The March 14, 2019 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Burcham, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Here.
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
Before us today, we have the meeting minutes from several council meetings. Mr. Trivett, was there something you'd like to add?
Because when we reviewed the minutes against the recording that Mr. Zhang did, we found some comments from the council that we'd like to go back and include.
With that, Mr. Mayor, I would like to move to approve the minutes of January 2nd, 2019 legislative briefing, January 30th the special meeting, and February 11th work session minutes.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
And we will be seeing the February 15 meeting minutes at our next meeting?
Next meeting.
Thank you. Next, matters of special privilege. We have none today. Public hearings, we actually have none. Monthly financial statement. Mr. Trivett, anything you'd like to highlight?
I think Ms. Dameron is going to talk to us a little bit about some of the contents.
Mayor Freiling and members of City Council, we have a strong report this month. With our general fund revenues, our property taxes are coming in strong. We are a little behind in our personal property collection, but we are utilizing our collection tools. I understand one of which is debt set-off, which means if someone is delinquent in their personal property, we submit to the state, and if they're getting a tax return, the state will route it to us. So the state's been a little slower getting the tax returns in, so we're hoping that'll pick up. In our local taxes, predominantly we're doing very well. Our meals taxes coming in, it came in, the average after this month's collection was about 3% ahead of budget. So I am anticipating that we'll definitely meet budget, most likely come in a bit above budget. On our room tax, we're coming in after collections this month about 0.6% ahead of budget. So again, I think we're going to meet budget on that. We do have a couple of, in addition, our business license, we're anticipating coming in maybe in the vicinity of $250,000 above ahead of budget. We do have a couple of areas that are trending below budget. Some are smaller items, but a couple of our larger items would be our recordation taxes. That is, oh, am I doing that? I'm sorry. Didn't mean to be doing two presentations at once.
Life was flashing before our eyes, but that's okay.
Sorry about that. Our recordations coming in behind our budget, I'm thinking at this point in the vicinity of $40,000 or $50,000. We also are behind in our rent in the vicinity of $90,000 to $100,000. I think that has to do with some closures of businesses that are leasing from us. Our expenditures are all in line with budget. I will remind you that at the end of last year, we only had about $600,000 under expended, and I would anticipate that we will have less than that this year. So I'm not anticipating that we finish the year adding a large amount to fund balance. Then looking at our tourism fund, our sales tax is coming in very strong there. I am based on the trend data, would estimate that we were going to exceed budget by about $134,000. But I do think we'll have some transfers out, so I would reduce that to about $84,000. Our lodging, or the $2 a night room tax, is trending again under budget. And I'm anticipating that we'll come in, it seems like every time I look at it, I change it a little bit. So I'll give you a range somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000 under that budget. We'll draw your attention to page 7, which is our utility fund. And I just want to point out, if you'll look at the water and sewer service, the revenue this year is trending below what we did last year. And what we're seeing is some reduced consumption. Having said that, however, And of course, the sewer will have an offsetting expenditure because we just run that revenue in and then turn it over to HRSD. Having said that, though, I'm not anticipating that we'll be drawing from our fund balance at this point.
You know, one thing that we would mention here is we talk a lot about the fund balance on the general fund side, but the utility fund is another one that we have to look at pretty closely. Our operating capital number, if you look at the projections over the next few years, it is a little concerning because it starts to decrease because consumption is down. And so part of our budget process, which we're of course in right now, is determining what our recommendation is to City Council in terms of the rate for the utility. So we're evaluating that right now. Our recommendation will be part of the proposed budget.
So having said that, we have a strong financial picture, although we do know that we have some, where we have some revenues that are coming in strong, that's going to be offset by some revenues that aren't coming in as expected. I would like to conclude, we received a report from Moody's, just their normal update, and it was a very positive report, and just a couple of comments that I would like to share that was in the report. One concerning finances. Williamsburg has a robust financial position, which is slightly favorable in relation to the assigned rating of AA1. Regarding our economy and tax base, the economy and tax base of Williamsburg are very strong, though this factor is slightly weak when compared to its AA1 rating. And our debt and pension liabilities of Williamsburg are small overall and satisfactory in relation to the assigned rating of AA1. They also point out, though, that our fund balance as a percent of operating revenues far surpasses the U.S. median, though it's decreased markedly between 2014 and 2018. I don't think this is anything that we haven't been aware of, but I wanted to take this opportunity to point that out and just say that that's something moving forward that we need to be aware of. Still strong, though, but we don't want to continue to weaken that.
Questions for Ms. Dameron?
No questions, just I guess a couple thoughts or comments. It's good that our rating is good, but I certainly do appreciate the note about the fund balance, which I think we all have been aware of, and certainly something that we want to protect. I know we have a policy here to maintain 35%.
Correct.
Fund. What is the average in most communities? Is there an average? The
average that they're showing is about 33.9.
Our policy is a little bit higher.
A little bit higher.
Right. Well, and so then that kind of switches over to when you think about water rates. It's good that consumption's down. People are consuming water, being more conservative. But unfortunately, the revenue that we use, not for profit, but to, for the facility, maintaining the staff and everything. The overhead. Those expenses continue to rise. And so the challenge is how do we make sure that the revenue stays, at a rate equal to expenses. And unfortunately, the only way to really answer that is increase consumption and revenue or raise the rate. And I think that's probably something that we're going to be faced with in the future.
But if consumption really is going down and people are using less water and the rate goes up a little bit, the net effect might be negligible to the resident. Mr. Zhang?
Thank you.
I have just one question. Do we have any sense of the potential impact of the opening of Midtown Row on water consumption, the large number of residential units?
I don't know that we have an idea of consumption. That's something that we could look at.
I think in my conversations with Mr. Clayton, though, certainly when some of the older facilities go offline and newer facilities tend to be more efficient. So.
And it's probably an easy calculus. We know how many sinks and toilets and showers there are, so you can calculate that. I know that for me, having gone through major renovations, taking toilets that do 3.5 gallons down to 1.8 gallon, there's a lot of savings, and same with other fixtures. So,
yeah. Thank you, Ms. Dameron. This takes us to our monthly departmental operating reports. Is there anything you would like to highlight, Mr. Trivett?
The only thing that I would highlight is that Mr. Barham has been working on a new component to the report that would be the FTE analysis that we've been sending outside of the monthly operating reports that are presented on the website. And I think next month that'll be available to you in a final format.
City manager reports?
None.
City attorney report?
Nothing.
We're just going right through, right? Unfinished business, this might take a little longer. Discussion and direction to staff concerning the recently completed fire station location analysis. Welcome, Chief Dent.
Good afternoon, Mayor Freiling, members of council. As a follow-up to the fire station location discussion that occurred in the January work session, I'm before you today to present some updates, updated information, as well as address some of the questions and concerns raised by City Council during that presentation, and ultimately make a staff recommendation. I thought it was important that we briefly start out looking at the background and what brought us to this point, specifically to benefit the folks that were not able to watch the previous January work session. So I did, before we start going through the presentation, I did want to take a moment and acknowledge the efforts of Sheila Gordon, the city's GIS analyst. As we go through this presentation, you're going to see maps and data that are the results of a tremendous amount of work by her. And I can assure you that she's happy that I'm not standing in her office a couple of times a day requesting more information and more maps. So I did want to acknowledge Sheila for all of her hard efforts. So in the beginning, we had a purpose statements where the very broad purpose statement states that the proceeds from the bonds would be used to finance capital improvements for the fire station and the police station. This is important because this commitment to the bondholders really forms what the money can be used for. So briefly go over the timeline. In 2016, I initiated conversations with then City Manager Mr. Collins to talk about developing a plan for a fire station renovation, possibly a reconstruction, or the addition of a second fire station. So in the development of that plan, it led us to, in 2017, a needs analysis conducted by a consultant to look at our current facilities, police and fire, and make a recommendation on where we needed to move forward with the current condition of those facilities. On the fire station side, they were also asked to take a look at available sites throughout the city if we decided to move the location, add a second station, but to look at those sites to see if they could accommodate a fire station, and if they could accommodate a fire station, what would be the impact on our deployment model, and most importantly, our response times. Also in 2017, the city issued general bonds totaling a little over $19.6 million, refunding some previous debt, leaving $13.1 million for construction between the two projects, the fire and police facilities. In 2018, we engaged another consultant to take a look at our deployment model, our response times, really took an overall look at the department, but mainly focusing on response times, and to determine if we reached a point where a current station is sufficient or a second station model would be more efficient for our responses. Although, as we've discussed in previous conversations about this consultant study, there were some issues throughout the study, but at the end, the final recommendation was that they favored a two-station model for the city of Williamsburg. Then we looked at, there's some decision points where we are still with whether we're the city council's policy decision on a one-station model or a two-station model, and then selecting a layout, and then further down the road, a discussion on the police station renovation, which is not a part of the discussion today. I briefly, again, you've seen this slide before, but I wanted to review it because everyone's familiar with our emergency responses for fire and EMS. But there's many services outside of emergency response that we provide to the community now that some people don't know about. Our community risk reduction program, as you can see, it has many programs listed underneath that community risk reduction. Is a tremendous amount of workload. Some of our more popular programs is the smoke alarm program and also the child safety seat program. We install well over 100 car seats a year for the child safety seat program. What does that entail? That entails it's extra training. They have to meet continuing education requirements, so it's another workload on staff. We also have people trained that are part of the Regional Technical Rescue Team. We recently, over the last couple of years, trained firefighters to the hazardous materials technician level, which provides us with additional information about hazardous material incidents, but also they become a part of the York County team and able to assist on regional responses. Another program that's really grown is our mobile integrated healthcare program. It's still fairly new, where between human services and the fire department and the police department, we're putting citizens in touch with programs that can meet their needs, so that we can reduce 911 responses, but overall that they live a healthier lifestyle. We also have members that are trained for the regional dive team. And another thing that takes a lot of time from our staff is special event planning and staffing. We staff and support approximately 40 special events a year from the fire department. And then another ancillary duty for the fire department is emergency management coordination. As you all know, I serve as the emergency management coordinator. Mr. Trivett's the emergency management director. But we pretty much take care of the keeping plans up to date and the day-to-day activities that are related to emergency management. So again, that's just to highlight some of the things that the department's doing outside of normal fire and EMS responses. This slide is to address a question raised by City Council concerning the history of the second fire station. I think it's important to note here that this wasn't a site selected by the city and the city built this station. This is the site directly behind Aldi and directly across the street from James Blair Middle School. This station was built in 1965 by then the James City County Volunteers. It was a 22,080 square foot building. After some internal issue with that volunteer organization, the building sat vacant for a little while, and then the city acquired the structure in 1965 and started responding from there until 1976. And if my memory serves me correct, I believe it was 2010 that we demolished that building from that site. Another slide that you've seen in previous presentations along with previous budget retreats. One of the things that we still do, you know, our staffing model on certain days when our ALS technician firefighters are not working, that if we get a second medic call, we take the staffing from the tower and that responds to second medic call. So as we go through this presentation, I just ask you to keep in mind that the staffing that I requested is for a one-station solution or a two-station solution. It's the same amount of staffing. It's just whether they're operating from one building or two buildings. Last year, City Council approved a 1.5 position. The half position was adding benefits to a contract position, which allowed me to move that position from fire administration to operations to give us additional people out in the field. The estimates for staffing, again, is for one station or a two-station solution, 4 new firefighter medics, and 3 new officer positions, about $300,000 annually. And then if the second station is the solution approved by City Council, it adds some maintenance costs to that second building of about $67,000. That's a rough figure that we used, a formula that we found just to kind of give us a ballpark of what that might be. This graph was provided previously as well to show you the number of increased responses from 2005 to 2018. One of the things requested by City Council was to add the number of staffing. So that blue line you see in the middle of the bars was our authorized staffing for each of those years. One thing to point out is that it fluctuated throughout the years, but at least 6 or 7 of those positions were fire administrative positions, including our administrative assistant. Right now, with that extra half position that we added last fiscal year, or actually this fiscal year, we have 41 people, 41 FTEs, 6 are administrative positions, and 35 assigned to field operations. As Mr. Trivett and I discussed the previous presentation, we think we confused everyone on NFPA 1710 requirements in the January work session presentation. So these two charts display it more effectively than we did in the January work session. A couple things to point out is the NFPA 1710 is a standard. It's a recommendation to measure yourself against. There's numerous NFPA standards, as you're well aware, and many of those standards, if we attempted to meet every NFPA standard as a locality, we could not afford to do that. It would be cost prohibitive. So we really try to select the ones that are beneficial to our employees and to our community. So this is one that we try to measure ourselves against. Many departments measure response time in different ways. One of the things, we've always measured our response time from the time we receive the call from dispatch until we arrive on scene. And as we know, most citizens, if you've called for help, that's when you consider the clock has stopped, is when you see us pull up out front. I'll say a little bit further about that here in just a minute. So this is the standard range for EMS calls, 6 minutes and 45 seconds. It breaks it down from what the dispatch center is responsible for and what the Williamsburg Fire Department is responsible for. Again, our response time is measured from the time we receive the call until we arrive on scene, and that's a 5-minute average. So if you add that processing time from dispatch, which is about a 90-second average for us, we fall within that 6-minute range as an average. If you look at the map on the right, that was 6 months of EMS call data that we provided to the consultant who was conducting the location analysis study. Each of those numbers, 100 through 400, are just the way we break the city up in zones. So we took a look at our calls, and not from the time from the time dispatch receives the call until we arrive on scene, we added a with patient time. So if we arrive at a hotel, a college dorm, what's the additional time that's required for us to actually enter the building and locate the patient and make contact with the patient? So that's what you see reflected there in those times, 8 minutes and 21 seconds for that 300 zone, 951 for the 550 calls, 555 calls in the 400 zone. And as Mr. Trivets pointed out before, that 400 zone is kind of broken up pretty broadly. So we'll take a look at addressing that as we move forward.
Chief, could I just ask for clarification on this? The large zone with 2 400s in it, is that 2 separate zones or one zone?
It's one zone. We just have it broken down into one zone.
It's a total of 400, not 800. Because you've got the number.
It's the name of the zone.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
So, and those, again, that's just 6 months worth of calls from 2018 and just EMS calls. So once again, we ask, after the last meeting, we asked CELA to review, actually to conduct some initial modeling, GIS modeling, to look at what locations in the city would provide the optimal or most gain in our response times from those certain locations. And she looked at across the entire city. She came up with 3 locations that would potentially, decrease our response times. The first one, she ranked them gold, silver, bronze. Obviously, we didn't have those colors available to us. So the yellow circle indicates the area of the city that would provide us the optimal response time. The gray is and that's on the Capitol Landing Road area. The gray is the Ironbound Road area, which was second, and then the orange color was Quarter Path Road, which was ranked number 3. And then after we looked at that modeling, realizing that we have 2 projects that are funded with the bonds, a fire station and a police station facility, in an effort to eliminate land acquisition costs, we then asked CELA to overlay another layer of city-owned properties. All three circles on the map are in close proximity to city-owned property. The yellow circle is 912 Capitol Landing Road. The silver is 150 Ironbound Road, which is the site of the old station that I showed you previously. Unfortunately, the orange is Quarter Path Park, so I don't think Robbie would be agreeable to us building a station in the ball fields at Quarter Path Park. So we eliminated the Quarter Path area and just continued to look at Ironbound Road and Capitol Landing Road. So then we get to potential improvements with response times. If you look at the center with the center map with the existing station, it indicates our 8-minute response times as we currently stand. Little over 93% of the total in the 8-minute response time, 31% in 4-minute response time. And it lists the number of addresses that fall within there. If you look at the existing station in Ironbound Road, Ironbound Road gives you an 6-minute gain, a little over 6 minutes, and 8-minute response time, and a 14% gain in the 4-minute response time. And again, it reflects the number of addresses and the percentages of the total. If you look at the existing station in Capitol Landing Road, there's a minimal gain in the 8-minute response time. In the 4-minute response time, there's an 18.5% gain, which is 49% increase in the 4-minute response time. So again, each person could look at this differently, but really for making an impact on the largest number, that 18.5% gain in the 4-minute response time is what we consider as to be optimal. So then we produce, again, look at it another way. If you look at some more GIS modeling, we took our 2018 call data, we ran those numbers, and this was also a question that came up from Councilman Maslin, is if we had those stations at Ironbound and Capitol Landing, what's the number of calls out of our 2018 call data would they have responded to, first due? So if you look at Ironbound and the current station, Ironbound would have, well, there's one caveat here, is when the modeling was run for our 2018 call data, if the call was equal distance from the current station and the potential new station location, the modeling kicked it out. But we took that and assigned it, because they could get there at the same time, we took those calls and assigned them to the station with the lower call volume. So if you look at the current station and the Ironbound Road map, you'll see that over 3,000 of the calls would have come from the current station, 713 calls from the Ironbound Road station. And then it shows the address split between those two locations. We did the same thing with the Capitol Landing Road area. Over 800 calls would have been assigned to that district with 4,000 addresses, and 2,900 calls for the addresses for the current station. One thing to note on that current and Capitol Landing Road map is that there's more of an equal address split as compared to the Ironbound Road and current station. Then we looked at it from another way. We took the central point of the city and the existing station and consider this as the staffing for 2 stations responding from one station, and you split the crew to assign to run to one district, and the other half of the crew assigned to run to another district. So this, again, and none of these reflect our mutual aid calls. We just looked at calls in the city. So you see the split there of 1994 for the purple section and the brown section 1792, and a couple thousand number in the address split.
And I guess just to be clear, this is sort of just an exercise, right? If we decided to build a station or renovate across the street, the chief and his staff would have to do a much more thorough job of deciding what that responsive zone would be.
So then we get into cost and design. As we go through for the two station options, one at Ironbound, one at Capitol Landing, you'll see a difference in the cost, but the cost of building the station is exactly the same for either location. We added the assessed land value just so for City Council's purpose, just to see what the assessed value of the property is. So the only difference in the 14,000 square foot station at Ironbound Road would be the $665,900. That's the assessed value of the property. The cost of building the station is exactly the same. And you can see there a sketch of what the station may look like if you decided the station was, Ironbound Road was the place to build a second fire station. The same thing for Capitol Landing Road, 912 Capitol Landing Road. The assessed value of the land is lower, but the cost of constructing the station is the same. And then it also has a sketch of what the station would look like on Capitol Landing Road. And I'll do a cost summary on these totals here in a few minutes. So if council decides that the second station is the option, this is what the renovation cost would be for the current station, a little over $5.2 million. So it doesn't add, it only adds about 2,000 square feet to the building, but there's some opportunity for redesign. But really most of the major work that would need to be done is covered in this estimate. So in the presentation from the January work session, you recall there was, we presented on possible reconstruction of the existing station and moving fire admin and the emergency operations center over to the third floor of the municipal building. That added about 20,000 square feet to the building, and the cost of that project is $11 million, a little over $11.5 million. So the cost summary is that reconstruction of the existing station and relocate fire admin and the EOC is about $11.5 million. Build the second station and renovate the existing station is about $11.2 million. And just to note that doesn't include the assessed value of the property because the city owns those properties. And then the current funding dedicated to the fire station projects is $11 million. Just to give you an idea of some fire stations that are under construction, currently under construction, New Kent is building a new station. It's 9,900 square feet at the cost of about $3 million. It's three drive-through bays. York County has a new station, one under construction, a little over $6 million. It's 18,000 square feet with 5 drive-through bays. So that just gives you an idea of what's under construction currently in our area. This was a slide that you've seen before that Mr. Trivett presented at the budget retreat that shows localities and their fiscal health stress versus their fiscal health. As you recall, and even though there was some question about it, that Winchester was the only locality that was ranked higher than Williamsburg. And the reason I bring that up, and before we go to the next slide, I'm not advocating what I'm going to show you about the Winchester Fire Department because they're 9.3 square miles similar to Williamsburg. I'm not advocating for 3 more fire stations and 30 more people, but it's another comparison to show you that did some additional research, just another locality to compare to. So Winchester Fire is 9.3 square miles. They operate 4 fire stations. They have 9 people, 72 career, 9 in fire administration, and 63 assigned to operations. They responded to 6,000 calls in 2017. Again, in no way advocating that's where Williamsburg needs to be. One of the things pointed out that their population is 27,000, more than Williamsburg, and obviously their tax rate is 91 cents, so it's a little different than the city of Williamsburg as well. We're going to look at a option comparison. This was also a request from City Council to kind of have some of the most important factors listed on a chart so you could look at them all. So a lot of the information you're going to see on this chart I've already covered in the presentation. And as we go through this, it's going to highlight which number or what in that category is green, which kind of is the winner. Some of it's a little subjective, so your opinion may differ from Mr. Trivett or mine. So we highlighted it green where we thought was kind of the winner in that category. So we've already discussed with new personnel. New personnel would be the same regardless of which option we choose of the 3. No equipment, no new equipment. That's not to say we don't need to replace equipment, but we don't need to add additional equipment to the fleet for any of the 3 options. There's the cost comparison. Obviously, as stated, Ironbound, if you choose the second station, Ironbound, Capital Landing, the costs are the same.
It's important to note that that cost does not include the land value, because what we're showing you there is the cost to the city budget. And obviously, the land cost of property we already own is not something we would have to pay out.
Well, and the concept of using land value is interesting because Ironbound Road has been held for so long that the actual cost of that property is significantly less than what we paid cash for just a few years ago on Capital Landing Road.
Right, and I think too, it's a complete land value using assessed value is a completely different question than marketability. And, the likelihood of us to find a development prospect for it.
So the land value is reflected there with obviously the lowest assessed value of the 3 properties being considered would be Capital Landing Road. The responses assigned is what we looked at on the one map where if we split the station down the middle, 53% of the station would respond to one district and 47% to the other. The same with the calls would be split in those percentages. For Ironbound and the current station would respond to 81% of the calls, Ironbound to 19%. And then for Capital Landing Road, the current station 78% of the call volume, Capital Landing Road 22% of the call volume. The regional need, we have low, medium, high. We took the opportunity, Mr. Trivett set up a meeting with the 2 county administrators and the fire chiefs from those localities, and we sit down and actually had a map to look at where they laid out where their future considerations were for fire stations, including ones that are already under construction, and how our decision to build a second station would play into regional impact. During that discussion, it came out the Capital Landing Road would be, from a regional perspective, that's where the need would be looking there, and you'll see that that's highlighted. The high is highlighted green.
We also took the opportunity while we had that audience to talk about mutual aid. And so we showed them what our mutual aid responses were in 2018. And I think they were a little surprised because the numbers are pretty high. Led to a really good conversation about things that they could do operationally to lower those numbers. And James City County particularly was going to go back and look at what they could do to help provide some relief in mutual aid.
So, and just for your information, that's 925 calls between fire and EMS to James City and fire and EMS to York, all combined was about 925 mutual aid responses in 2018.
Not to catch you off guard, but you don't happen to know how many responses they had within the city?
Yes, sir.
Not going to catch him off guard.
No, of course not. It's like to give him an out.
That's right.
For total responses into the city, James City was 137 and York County was 104. and that's fire and EMS combined.
So 240 ballpark
Yes, sir.
compared to 900
Yes, sir.
going out. And what's interesting, and I appreciate James City County in particular looking at this, because it's not just the disparity of that 660 some calls. It's the ratio of the number of calls to the size of the department. When you look at how big the departments are in the surrounding counties, it's obvious that the Williamsburg team is more than pulling its weight. So it's great that they're willing to review that.
Well, and the chief and I had a conversation amongst ourselves about, does that data, because if we just throw the chart up, which is why we did, it's easy for a person to conclude that we're providing more assistance to James City County and therefore they should be paying us, or there should be some adjustment to that arrangement. But if you really think about their responses, while we have a higher number of responses to James City County, the apparatus and the crew that we're sending are far fewer than when they respond to us. So if you did the same chart based on expense of that response, it would be closer to even. I'm not saying it would be even, but it would be closer to even.
I was just looking, about 521 of our calls are EMS calls where we're sending, as to Mr. Trivett's point, we're sending a medic unit with 2 people into James City County. If we get a structure fire in the city, they're sending 3 or 4 pieces, depending on the location, and York may be sending equipment as well.
Chief, could we also recognize the mutual aid assistance we get from Camp Perry and Naval Weapons Station, which helps us?
Yeah, and most of our mutual aid from Camp Perry is backfilling the station when we have an extended event, which is great because we get that coverage.
Not to beat down on the mutual aid, but I just wanted to be clear that we're not feeling indifferent about this. I think the relationship between the city and the counties is a favorable one, and we're glad to participate and certainly welcome, whatever response they get, from us and vice versa.
Yes,
So
sir, absolutely. And in fact,
criticism to that relationship.
during the meeting, Mr. Stevens and Chief Ash both acknowledged that they use our EMS resources particularly a lot, and they're going to take a look at how they could do something to address that.
Well, you can imagine how much harder it would be for us to provide the same level of service to the city if the counties weren't providing mutual aid and vice versa. So it's something that we very much enjoy and don't wish to change.
That's right.
So the next line was management difficulty. Obviously, by adding a second station, it changes the dynamic that we've been accustomed to in Williamsburg. In my discussions with Mr. Trivet, it presents more challenges, but previous slides talked about adding 3 supervisors, so it's about putting the right people in the right places, and I believe we have the talent within to maintain and carry out the mission of the department, regardless of whether the chief's office is next door or not. Operational cost, we looked at obviously adding a second station increases maintenance cost, and for both of those 2 station models, the maintenance cost may be increased slightly if you choose to do a reconstruction at the current station, just because you're going to add 20,000 square feet of space. But in that category, adding a second station does increase the operational cost. We've looked at the response time gains, and as we looked at the maps, and the Ironbound Road site gives you increase in the 8-minute and 4-minute. Again, the Capitol Landing Road gives you that 18.5% gain in the 4-minute response time, which is that critical factor for a lot of reasons for fire and EMS responses. Redevelopment potential, what's more likely to attract redevelopment with the addition of a second fire station, and Mr. Trivet and I discussed that, and we actually spoke with Carolyn Murphy, and she agreed that would be Capitol Landing Road would be the site that would be more attractive to redevelopment in that area. Vulnerability, we have the current location ranked high with the college in Colonial Williamsburg, and then we also agree that Capitol Landing Road site is ranked high due to the density and commercial properties in that area and looking towards future development in the quarter path area. So taking all those things into consideration, the previous recommendation for the Lafayette Street reconstruction was based on concerns for budgeting for new staff, also the management difficulty, and then the operational costs associated with building a second fire station. Throughout the budget retreat and working with Mr. Trivett, we've identified a construction timeline that would allow us to increase the staff gradually. So the staffing concern is eliminated, but the other concerns remain, which is the operational cost and the management difficulty, but outweighed by response times. The policy to look at our response times is where we started. And even in my initial discussions in 2016 and throughout the consultant studies, I've always said I support wherever the data leads us. And so based on that information, staff recommends design and construction of a second fire station to be located at 912 Capitol Landing Road and the renovation of the existing Lafayette Street station.
Questions for Chief?
Yeah, just a couple questions, and I'll come back and make some comments. But first, thank you, Chief and Mr. City Manager, on all the extra effort that you all had to put through, go through to get this data to us, and I think it's been very helpful. One of the things you didn't talk about so much today was, you touched on call volume, and it's clear that the call volume has been going up, what I think is significant. So my question about the rising call volumes, is it safe to say that you'll see that trend go the other way, or is that going to continue to go up?
Yeah, and I don't see any indication that that's going to go down. Even one of the things we were hoping with our community risk reduction efforts and our mobile integrated healthcare, that we're going to start seeing some results of those 911 calls. But and comparing it to other localities across the country, I don't see any indication that call volume is going to go down. Over the years, we've looked at trying to identify what those particular reasons are. There's no clear-cut reason for it. Even when we brought on our ALS technician firefighters, we tried to identify peak volumes so we could have them working during those peak volumes, and it fluctuates every week. It's Sunday this week and Friday next week, so there's really no, but there's no indication that the call volume is going to decline.
I think so. And increasing call volumes into one station, I would imagine, is it safe to assume has an adverse effect to staffing in terms of recruitment and retaining, staff?
Yeah, I absolutely feel it does. They could go to other localities that have multiple stations, and only out of that one station may only respond to 2,000 calls the entire year. Right. There's localities or neighboring localities that have multiple fire stations that are responding to just over 11,000 calls a year. So from a workload perspective, it's more attractive to go to us and earn comparable salary and run 2,000 calls a year as opposed to the number of calls that we're running. And that's not to say that every time the alarm goes off, that person's going, but every time the alarm goes off, everybody in the station is alerted there's a call. So it does contribute to sleep deprivation, which is a concern for the fire service in general.
If we were only do renovation, expand and renovate the current station, that doesn't do anything to resolve redundancy issues in terms of if there were a major catastrophe on the rails system right here and it caused a problem that affected the station's operability, having whatever renovations we do there, I mean, that's still an issue, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So I don't have any other questions, but I'll have some comments later, but thank you.
Mr. Zhang?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chief, for presenting today, and wanted to pass along my appreciation to you, your staff, and also to the city manager, and also our GIS coordinator for putting in all this work. Obviously, we are confronted with a difficult question today, although for some it might not be as difficult as it seems, but the data is dispositive with regard to call volume. And, in terms of mutual aid, I appreciate that the other localities are looking into it based on our discussions and that fact that we are having productive discussions, but also appreciate as well the mutual aid that we receive given how we are a college town. We've got CW. We have a lot of different factors that I think distinguishes us from other localities as well. So in terms of the call volume, with the data there, I think it speaks for itself. I wanted to shift a little bit into the cost. So just wanted to clarify, under the cost summary, with that slide, for the reconstructing the existing station and relocating fire and admin and EOC, for folks who haven't been following up until this point today, by relocating, this is implying that this will go into City Hall in the 3rd floor, re-outfitting that existing space where council met temporarily past few years before the striker came online into an EOC center, right?
Yes, sir.
That's really, I think, part of what's driving up the cost to be what it is.
Yes, sir, because there was, I believe it was in the $750,000, $800,000 figure to renovate that existing space to, into an EOC and fire admin.
Right. And thank you for that. Just wanted to make sure that we all had the facts out here today. I had actually a quick question for Drew or Michelle. In terms of redevelopment potential, appreciate that you included the land value, land assessed value. I'm more curious about if there is a fire, what is the impact, the surrounding economic impact, whether to property values, to, economic value that a business coming into the area would see with a fire station there. Does it impact it at all? Obviously for downtown, it doesn't seem to have affected it, but I'm just curious, what is the general trend with that?
Generally, public investment drives private investment. So new public investment, regardless of where you put it, but it's particularly helpful in an area that needs redevelopment, helps drive that interest.
Right, and this is obviously a very small piece towards the consideration of, whether we want to locate in Capitol Landing or Ironbound, but it's just a piece to consider given council's overriding GIO's policy to try to redevelop Capitol Landing Road and the Northeast Triangle as the next, big potential development area. So just figured I'd throw that question out there. I think at the end of the day, it's just about making sure that residents receive the quality of services that the valuable quality of services that the EMS and fire services provide. And I think it's excellent right now. And with, I guess I'll wade into that a little bit later, but that should be the overriding consideration. And appreciate you giving this presentation today.
Thank you.
Ms. Ramsey?
I just have a couple questions, and I'd like to say thank you for your very comprehensive presentation. It was very well done, a lot of good information. You mentioned addresses and have 7,000 and 3,000, and I'm just curious about places like hotels, the college, assisted living. Does that count? How many addresses does that count for?
They count as one address.
Okay. So with the college having 8,000 students, it's one address.
Well,
Or the number that would be on campus.
It'd be one address per building.
Yeah,
Oh,
one address per building.
For the door, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
But in the case of like an apartment building where there's a suite of addresses for every unit, then that would count as individual addresses.
Correct.
okay. And like for a hotel?
Hotels
Just
count as one address.
Okay, I was just curious. And we commented about the land value was based on assessed value, not on market value or the cost that what the city paid for it.
Correct.
So it's just current assessed value as vacant property now. And then the last question is, how much land is really optimal for construction of the size of second fire station we would want and need?
It's, I believe if I recall correctly, it was 1 acre for every 10,000 square feet of building, and that includes having adequate space for a parking lot as well.
My recollection, and Mr. Cronin is here today, our consultant in this, that the advice was that when we were first looking at sites at the beginning of this process back in 2016, we were looking for places that had at least 2 acres or close to it.
Okay.
for that reason. Because relocating that station was about 30,000 square feet, the building we had designed. So when we reached out to the consultant, it was 10,000 square feet, an acre for every 10,000 square feet, and that included, so that would get you the adequate parking that was necessary.
Okay.
And the current sites, one thing I didn't mention, the Ironbound Road site, it's actually two parcels. It's just over, it's almost 1.2 acres, and the other site is over 2 acres.
Right. Yeah, I think it's 2.67, something like that. And then the number of bays we're talking about would be three.
14,000 square foot station, which is includes 3 drive-through bays.
Like what the New Kent one was. that you
Similar to
showed.
the New Kent.
Okay.
The only difference between that and New Kent is because the funding was limited, it's pretty much a shell of the building, and then as comparison to what York County's.
Right.
But quite a bit of square footage difference as well.
So, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chief, for the presentation. Also, thanks for the collaboration during the study with all the council members and the city manager. So when I was a volunteer, we moved into the new station, which is now the old station, and we had plenty of room for our 35-plus members. Now we have about 25 volunteers. What does this CIP mean for the volunteer members and how they can better be engaged and assist?
Well, it's oftentimes it's discouraging if they show up to put in hours as a volunteer. We don't have adequate space on most days for them to spend the night, so they can only stay up until bedtime and then they leave. So it's discouraging for them, and they put in the amount of training to, the amount of time to get trained to actually perform some of the duties and assist us, and then we don't have adequate space to provide for them. And I mean, even with no volunteers right now, our space is very limited. I mean, we showed that in the very first presentation with the way our bedroom's designed, and with the diversity we have in the department now, that we just don't have adequate space, even for the career staffing. So, to your point, the volunteers as well.
And then following up on Benny's point, a little different angle though, benefit to businesses and homeowners in terms of insurance rates. Because I know you've done studies and you've gotten to within like 1 point of being the top tier, right? Does this
We're
help?
still arguing that, by the way.
Does this help us? Because I know that a lot of insurance companies want to know distance to the nearest fire hydrant and nearest fire station. Will this be helping the community?
Again, each individual insurance company is different. Even with the ISO rating, it doesn't guarantee that your company's going to lower your insurance rate, but certainly the potential is there to lower insurance rates for citizens.
Thank you.
Chief, can we go back to one of your very first slides?
Take a while to get there.
It's slide number 5, page 5. Sorry. Well, let me start.
Services?
Yes. So I'm just curious, does the business inspections and code enforcement category include the food truck inspection program?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The one thing that really jumps out at me here, and you don't really have to get there, I'm sorry. It takes that long.
Is this the slide?
Yeah, it's that last bullet, special event planning and staffing. I think one of the important things for council to remember is that we've been very encouraging of more, bigger, better special events, which is just going to continue to put more burden on our existing fire and EMS staff. So I think it's one good example of how we need to be cognizant of the impacts that we place on city staff by some of the goals that we set forward. So I just want to thank everybody for their role in that and understanding as we try to move that forward. One of the things first let me ask a question about the second station with the smaller renovation of the downtown station. One of the things we had been told early on that was really important for the renovation of the downtown station was better distinction, and I might have the terminology wrong here, but between hot and cold areas, or ways to decontaminate so that you're not carrying toxins into living spaces and being more vulnerable to that exposure. Does the smaller renovation and will the new station help us accomplish what we need to in those areas?
the new station would definitely be designed to those standards. And I would, we've specifically talked about that throughout the process of the renovation. So I'm looking to Mr. Cronin. I would assume that that's part of the cost that was included, that we design those areas, because that's extremely important to me to protect our personnel. Because as you know, you read every day where another firefighter has been diagnosed with cancer because of all the cancer-causing agents they're exposed to. So everything we could do to eliminate that from, as you stated, entering the living quarters and making sure that everyone's decon is extremely important. So if that were the decision as we move forward, we'd certainly make that a part of the project.
And I'm not looking to spend more money, but can we just make sure that when we do this, we accomplish that to the best degree possible?
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
I know you can always spend more to do more, and at some point you get a diminishing rate of return. But let's not cut something too short in order to meet some financial goal. The other thing that concerns me is, if I have your information right, we have about 13.1 million available in funding for fire and police. And the more economical of these scenarios is looking at 11.2 million just for fire. So that leaves 1.9 million for police, which obviously isn't going to get us where we need to go. And one of the reasons I want to bring that up is not that we don't need to spend this money on fire and EMS, and not that we won't need to spend money to renovate or build a new police station, because they are very much in need of new facilities. But it's all about how we're going to balance these significant capital expenditures. And tomorrow morning, we're going to have another meeting about significant obligations with construction of new schools. And so we're under a fair amount of pressure right now, because these are critical needs for our community. Education is too. Education is hugely important. But if there's a way to change the timeline on this that allows us to better meet all of these needs, I think it would much better serve the entire community. Now I'll come back to, one other question, I'm sorry. The other thing I couldn't quite get a handle on is the example that you used of the York County station. It looked like it had 4 bays. It looked like it was about 18,000 square feet, and yet it's about the same cost as our second station, either place without land. How is that just an increase in construction costs?
Well, I think, and again, I think when Mr. Cronin and I had the discussion, I think that we're hoping that based on current construction costs, that our estimates are a little high. These are not detailed estimates; they were rough estimates. So we're thinking that those estimates are a little high. Actually, the York County station is it's actually 5 drive-through bays. One bay is hidden. But they also, if you look to the right of that building over the back corner, you'll see another roof line, which is a training tower that's incorporated into that project as well. So Mr. Trivett and I have had the discussion often since we got the pricing that, we're hoping that this would be on the high end of construction cost.
I think we put this slide in here because we were encouraged by these numbers. And I don't want people to think that we're going to get away with a construction cost similar to New Kent, because if we're building on Capitol Landing Road, that's an ARB corridor, and so it's going to have to look a lot more like the York County station to satisfy that requirement. But still, what we're building is smaller, and so you should be able to assume that if we do this in fairly close proximity time-wise, that our construction costs would be slightly less than that $6 million. And if that's the case, then all that does is help us in regard to planning for all 3 of these big projects that we're currently working on.
That's helpful to know. I'll come back to my colleagues for comments.
Thank you, sir. But just looking at this one slide, I do hope that should we ultimately agree for another station, that we try to be as conservative as possible. Maybe we don't need brick veneer on 4 sides and that type of thing. And I'd be willing to sacrifice some of that. I'm not on the ARB.
How can
Been there, done that. So one of the things, when we talk about call volume, it strikes me that a second station is needed. And I think there could be an argument that if we expand our current station, do what was recommended last month and move the EOC and spend $11.5 million that would meet the need today. But I think based on the conversations I've had, some of the conversations we just had here today, we're going to see call volumes increasing. We're going to have a second station in the future. And so whether it's 5 years, 6 years, 7 years down the road, we're going to spend, and if we don't do it today, we'll spend $11.5 million on the current station, but we'll still be faced with $6 million on a second station in the future. And so the capital outlay then is $17, $18 million. And I think we can satisfy the needs of today and the future at a much better budget number, less than renovating the first station. And for me, that's enough reason to support a second station. But I think there's other rationale, just, the cost, lowering the call volume, the impact that it has on the personnel over here, all to me lead us to having the need for a second station. The redundancy, having a second station on the other side of the railroad tracks, and away from where it is today, affords us a lot of opportunity. So, I think it's time that we make the decision to build a second station based on the data and the presentation and information from staff. I'm confident that the Capital Landing Road area is the right place to be.
So I concur with the Vice Mayor with this rationale. I also support the construction of the second fire station. Speaking to this issue, 2 questions came from the previous council meeting regarding need for more GIS data. And with that data, particularly pertaining to call volume, but also to the location of where this fire station would be, those questions have been answered. And I think the overarching philosophy in terms of the policy that we're really driving about is improving response time, which I think this fire station adequately meets. Now, some of the other concerns I've heard from other folks, there are those who supported it and those who have raised the issue. We have a city-owned property that was bought for the purposes of redevelopment for economic return, for attracting a private business to come in and then, be able to generate more revenue to the city. I think it's been known what my feelings are with regard to the city's buying up properties. And I think a public use, such as a fire station that's backed with data, such as presented today, so aptly by the fire chief and by the city manager, points to the fact that we need to have one. And ultimately, the public use should be what ties the city government's decision down. I think it's also bolstered by what our economic development director and also our city manager said, that public investment will drive private investment. So this may go hand in hand in other ways that could actually benefit council's GIO plans towards the redevelopment efforts at the Northeast Triangle, not necessarily conflict with that vision as well. So there were some residents from the Capital Landing Road corridor in Brandywine who support having a second fire station. So that question, that concern, I think, has been addressed. Ultimately, I think this is a wise investment. This is a big, significant investment. For a while, since you talked about the history of when the city last had its second fire station, we've had spans of decades up to this point where we have to decide on it. And there's no doubt that this has been a significant discussion, but I think given the data, given the overarching policy needs, I believe that this is the right thing that we should do. So I joined the Vice Mayor and will be supporting it.
Well, thank you again. And I just had a couple comments, and it's sort of related to the economic development and the public spurring the private. And I just wanted to relay a few comments from the council from the EDA meeting yesterday, because it was noted that 912 was purchased for economic development back in 2015, and then 924, which is the next parcel next to it, and then 942 just in 2017, to create a large tract for economic development in that corridor. And so it was all part of a strategic plan to have a large enough parcel to make an impact for development to come in. And so the EDA is not unsupportive of a fire station on Capitol Landing Road, but just wants it to be remembered that the sort of the reason for the procurement of that property, and who knows, perhaps something might in that same area might come up in the near future, because as it's been said, the data does show that that is the more logical of the choices. And I don't think that, as I said, the EDA is not unsupportive of a second fire station, and I don't think that that there wasn't support for a second fire station even at our last council meeting. It was just sort of the timing of when that would be, and the data does help support it as far as where we feel the response times for current and future development, if you will come. So, and also since we're working to solve the staffing requirements, because I think we all agreed that that was paramount, whether we did one station, second station, 5 years, 10 years down the road, or concurrently. So, thank you.
I got an email this morning from retired Chief Weiler. He wanted to be at this meeting, but is sick today. He does support the recommendations of building Station 2 now, and expand or renovating the existing station. I remember he used to tell me that his retirement date was pegged on us building Fire Station 2, and obviously we missed that timeline. He also reminded me that he actually had served in the old Station 2 a long time ago.
Please don't give Chief Dent any ideas.
No, I agree with the Chief's recommendations and the staff report, and glad that we've seen alternatives presented to council. I think it was 2 years ago I stood up in the public forum and say, this is a 40-year decision. I think the city council should see alternatives, and that's what's happened. Thank you.
Chief, one other question, if I may. If it sounds like we're going to the second station on Capitol Landing Road, not to get ahead of ourselves, so what would be the timeline on construction? Do we have any idea yet when we could expect completion? Because I'm imagining, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm imagining we wouldn't really get into the renovation of the first station until we finish the second station, or we do them both at the same time?
So that's a conversation that Mr. Trivett and I have had. We think there could be some potential cost savings if we did them both at the same time. But the timeline would be, if approved by City Council, it's probably a 3-month process for bid, and then the last time we looked at this, we were told it'd at least take 9 months for design. So then it would be at least a year from now before any construction would begin at all, and that's if everything was in a perfect scenario.
The answer I prefer is a while.
2 years from?
I think
that's
that's
what
reasonable.
We've said from the beginning, once we get the go-ahead, if we got the go-ahead to do it, it's going to be a 2-year project.
And you do see, so when you say concurrently, would we then start renovating the other station first, or would we wait?
It would, a lot of what you're asking is going to depend upon what we get back in terms of response to an RFP, because, you know, normally you see cost savings if the sites you're building are in close proximity. In this case, they are not. So I don't know how much cost savings there will be. Normally that's associated with mobilization, and in this case, there's likely to be 2 mobilizations because it's 2 different locations. So it's too premature for us to really have good answers to this.
And the other thing I would ask, and this may be part of the plan, if we're going to build a second station, and we know, or I don't know that we know anything, but we have a pretty good feeling that call volume is going to continue to rise with time. When we build that second station, is there a way to design it with the possibility of expansion in mind, so that 10, 15 years from now, when another council is having this conversation, there's a way they can bump out one side of the building and increase the capacity in a way that doesn't have them starting at square one again?
Yes, sir. And actually, if we go back to the sketch, if you look at the sketch there, one of the big differences with Ironbound Road is there is no expansion opportunities on Ironbound Road. This actually, Mr. Cronin had three areas there that could be expanded in the future if necessary, and that's those areas in light green around the building. So it was taken into consideration that the lot is of the size where we could expand in the future if needed.
Okay, that's very helpful. And the one other thing I would mention, and I appreciate the EDA's input, but I think as we've acquired these properties, we've also recognized there's somewhat of a barrier there between this property and the other two that the city has acquired that's created by that power line easement, and combining them all may not really be practical. So from that perspective, I'm not concerned about this. I agree with my colleagues. No need for me to keep talking.
So just a follow-up, I think we're heading into two stations. You know, one of the things that I would want to guard against or protect against is just kind of that budget creep. And I think, and I heard what you said about estimates for second station, and we all hope that they'll come in, you know, somewhere in between what York County's done and what New Kent's done, and we've got to figure that out. And I think it would be kind of arbitrary at this point for staff to say not to exceed a certain amount, because we just don't know what's out there. But and maybe I don't need to say any more, but I think we need to make sure that we hold those costs, you know, to a minimum, and maybe, and I'm not talking about skipping on the infrastructure that supports you know, the personnel from doing what they need to do, but maybe in the building design, you know, and again, I've said to the chief, I'm perfectly fine with hardy plank instead of brick. But I think we just need to make sure that we seek those types of savings, because, as the mayor pointed out, part of the bond draw that we have taken is to support renovations at the police station, and I think, you know, those are equally as important. We've got a huge, significant problem there that we need to overcome, and that's going to take extra money. Not that I'm opposed to looking at other resources to find those funds, but, you know, I don't want to be happily spending money just because it's there on the second station.
Do you have a motion?
I move that a second fire station be constructed on the city-owned property located at 912 Capitol Landing Road and the Lafayette Street Station, Station Number 1, be renovated consistent with required processes and staff recommendations.
Second.
No.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Motion passes. This takes us to new business, and we have one item for consideration today. It's consideration of Ordinance 19-05 to amend Section 9-333 of the Williamsburg City Code, decreasing fees for tour guide licensing. Ms. Shelton, I believe you're taking this forward?
Yes. So back in January, City Council amended the tour guide ordinance in accordance with where it appeared that the case law was going with respect to tour guides and licensing those tour guides and the required testing that the city and a number of jurisdictions had required tour guides to undertake prior to their business activities on city streets. We did not, however, deal with the fee. And the fee for a tour guide permit was largely based on the cost of the test and the background, the criminal background check that the tour guides are required to go through. The staff continues to feel that, notwithstanding the fact that the testing is no longer required, that it's necessary for the tour guides to have those criminal background checks because of the circumstances regarding the tours that are largely conducted in the city. And so the ordinance in front of you reduces the amount of the license fee to cover the cost of those background checks. I asked for the number from the police department, and that's where that number came from. I think it's important to bring the fee in line with what our actual costs are, because it's not designed to be a money-making operation. It's designed to cover the city's cost in providing those licenses. And so the staff recommendation is that council adopt the ordinance as presented.
Questions?
No questions. I support staff's recommendation.
I support staff's recommendation. I had one question. So the case law where it's developing, did the courts rule specifically on the fees that had to?
They did not. The only case that I'm really monitoring and concerned about is Charleston, and Charleston recovers these costs by adding a fee to the cost of the ticket, which is not an option for the city at this point in time. And so this is the recovery cost for us.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
No questions.
Just a clarification in terms of frequency. So is the fee once a year or one time, and is the background check once a year or one time?
Every 3 years, they're required to go through the licensing process.
Thank you.
And I just had, as Mr. Trivett and I were discussing this earlier in the week, $25 seems very low for the cost of conducting a background check in whatever administration is necessary for the tour guide test. Are we really comfortable with that number?
I'm going to defer to Chief Dunn on that question.
We looked at that. This is including salary, not benefits. I mean, there's certainly some other costs that probably are included in this. This is also a cost for should we not run into any issues or any concerns as we're processing this. If basically everything's pretty squeaky clean, then probably this is the cost. Should we find a situation where we're having to do some research, maybe it's because there's an alias, or maybe because there is, some other criminal history there, then it certainly could take more than this. But we certainly felt like $25 amount was certainly at a low level, not counting benefits, at which most could probably be completed.
Well, and we don't need to legislate for the rare exception. I'm not saying that. But so if you're comfortable that it covers the vast majority of these applications and the cost of processing them.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Just to follow up on in Charleston, they recoup the cost with extra fees or taxes on these admissions?
Effectively, yes.
So, but we can't address admission taxes down that road.
It is not currently an option for the city of Williamsburg to do what Charleston does.
How about a sales tax? Do they pay a sales tax on these tickets?
I haven't researched it enough to know the answer to that question.
Commissioner of Revenue can help with that down the road.
Do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move that council adopt proposed ordinance number 19-05.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
That concludes our new business, unless any member of council has anything to bring up.
Well, just, everybody has the news, but we did, Tourism Council made the announcement today that Vicki Semino has agreed to join us at the Tourism Council. Should be heading up as CEO, Executive Director, beginning in and around April 15th. So I know that she's really excited to be here. The search committee and the Tourism Council met with her, and we're really excited to have her. So looking forward to great opportunities moving forward.
And congratulations, I read the announcement, glad that that's done. And I just wanted to report one other thing from the EDA meeting yesterday, in that the EDA approved a $10,000 no net loss incentive to Tipsy Bean Coffee and Wine Bar, which is going to open in High Street in the space formerly occupied by Quirks of Art. So it'll be a new business, two young gentlemen coming in there. We're really excited to have them, and the incentive will provide 50% refund of sales and meals taxes capped at 1 year or $10,000, whichever occurs first.
Is there a particular application of this in the business, or is it just general support? Does it help them accomplish a discrete
it's just general
thing?
support.
Okay.
Wouldn't you say? Yeah.
Do you have something to add, Ms. DeWitt?
It's filling a gap so they can finish their capital investment costs, which is outfitting the building and purchasing the furniture, fixtures, and equipment for the business.
Great.
So it's physical aspects of the business.
I'll just add, last evening, Mr. Trivett and I had the pleasure of addressing a new student group that is dedicated to creating greater student engagement with the local community and city government. And I think we'll be hearing more from them in the coming months. Of course, we don't have so many more months before the school year is over, but I think they want to be prepared to really be involved next school year. Anything else?
To adjourn?
No, of course. We have open forum.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, taking away the right of the public.
Well, now, we'll come to the open forum. Anybody who'd like to address council on any matter, please come forward, state your name and address. If you could keep your comments to 5 minutes or less, we'd appreciate that. Our 5-minute clock is missing from the podium, so I'll try to give you a very gentle signal when you get to 1 minute left.
And I get 20 minutes.
Yours
My
will be
name's
so gentle.
Eric Stone. I live in James City County. Proud person to be retired from the City of Williamsburg Fire Department. But I just want to thank City Council. I want to thank the mayor, because at the work session, I remember the mayor saying, I'm not against another fire station. I'm not going to vote for it unless I know where it's going to be. And through the work with Chief Dent and IT, and thank you for letting me meet with you. And I just think that this is definitely the best decision and the right decision. I know myself and a lot of retirees been waiting for this for a long time. And I know there's some residents down on Capitol Land Road that's going to be very happy with this. There's going to be a lot of firefighters that's going to be happy once this is done, that they get to split the call load and reduce the wear and tear on them and the apparatus. But I just want to say thank you for supporting this, and thank you for making Chief Dent work for it.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Mr. Shelton? Welcome, Mr. Shelley.
I am Gary Shelley. I live at 205 Indian Springs Road. I assure you that I will be bringing my regular appearances here in open forum to a close in the not too distant future. No one knows better than me that we must look ahead and not dwell on mistakes made in the past. But we must acknowledge our mistakes, and from them we must learn not only what we did wrong, but why. From our mistakes, we learn about ourselves. And most importantly, I want to remind you all today, once again, of the enormous contributions that the college and its students bring to this community, particularly the downtown area. Case in point, we're all very much excited about the sale and the redevelopment of the shopping center. It is perhaps the most successful culmination to this point of our efforts that have been made to revitalize our city. But I've heard no recognition of the critical contribution that students have brought to this particular endeavor. As I understand it, the developers intend to build 5-story buildings that will mostly occupy rental units. They're targeting William and Mary students to be the primary occupants. Without the William and Mary students, I doubt that their plan would be viable, and I doubt that the developers would have any interest at all in this project. Perhaps I'm wrong about this, but I've not heard otherwise. Earlier this week, I spoke here in open forum of the disenfranchisement of William and Mary students when the right to register and vote was denied shortly before our 2004 City Council election. This action was taken by the voter registrar immediately after the voter registrar referred to their intent to participate in the election as a matter of interest. Those were his words. Students rightfully were furious and bitter. Local citizens who lived outside of the area contiguous to the college were generally supportive of the students. In March of 2004, Virginia Gazette editor Bill O'Donovan wrote, I quote, "Jeers to the city registrar for throwing repeated obstacles in the way of letting college kids register to run for city council. It's typical of the city to be perceived as obstructionist and unhelpful. Students reflect an alternative voice that rarely has been heard," unquote. On the other hand, there were a few residents who live in neighborhoods close to the college who were delighted that students could not vote. Although students understood that the policy would eventually be overturned, they were thwarted for several years from participating in local governance. That all changed when Wynne Sadler became city registrar. Shortly after her arrival, the General Assembly codified that William and Mary students could register and vote in this college town, just as students could vote in the rest of the United States. Some residents who lived close to the college were alarmed. Flora Adams and Stuart Godden, who live on Goodwin Street, wrote a letter to Governor Tim Kaine stating that allowing college students to register would have serious negative consequences. Williamsburg would no longer be a pleasant, lovely town, but a rundown party town, they said. They promised a backlash at the voting booth from residents who see their cities deteriorate under a Democratic administration. Ms. Adams and Mr. Godden also voiced objections. the August 28, 2009 Board of Elections meeting. Likewise, Nancy Canning of Nelson Avenue voiced her objections. So did Henry Coleman, who lives in College Terrace. They're all part of a small, influential, well-organized group of citizens who live in close proximity to the college, who have been vocal over the years that they prefer that students not live in their neighborhoods. I approve of the efforts the council has made to address vibrancy and other issues. But until council wholeheartedly supports students in their quest to be welcomed and valued in our neighborhoods, Williamsburg will fall far short of its potential. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shelley. Would anybody else like to address council? Seeing no one come forward, and before Mr. Pons gets out his urgent motion to adjourn, I'd just like to thank our young scout friend for being here today. We appreciate your interest and participation in today's meeting. Now, Mr. Pons?
My motion stands.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
We're adjourned.